the MET period.
Okay, welcome back. 2 more days you have to put up with me. This one last session, tomorrow 2 sessions, and day after 1 session. Then you want to see. I'm glad. So I want to stress again that I am not, very specifically, I am not taking your research problems because it's very difficult that I cannot address 30 people's different research problems. So I've taken a very general research problem and we are discussing it that way. And I want you all to apply that into your own research problems. And if you have any questions, please feel free to, I'm on Telegram, so you can message me separately or you can message in the group and I'll respond. And I'm very patient. I don't get irritated with Telegram. But my whole PhD dissertation was on communities of practice of the Telegram. So I will answer any question and what are those famous words, right? There's no such thing as a stupid question. Every question is relevant. So please feel free to ask any questions you like. And any doubts you have connected with what we do in these sessions with your particular research questions. On the last session on Saturday, we will devote the entire time to your particular research questions. So come prepared to with your topic ideas at least, and then we can even see how we can develop it further into a more precise research question on Saturday. We'll do that on Saturday. Okay, is that okay? So now we get into the section of data collection. Right? We kept on the first day I told you how important data is and how systematic we have to be about the data. About how we first of all design tools to collect data, how we collect the data, how we organize the data, and how we analyze the data. So today we'll start with the first process. Let us think of the different tools that we can use for data collection. Now we will not do the survey and the questionnaire because in action research we generally don't want to do surveys. Surveys are for large scale, more quantitative research or more positivist kind of research that you want. So we will focus on data collection. You can go to the next slide. Oh, sorry. I'll do that. Yeah. So we are going to focus on the data collection of qualitative data. And I will go through interviews, focus group discussion, classroom observation, and show you some examples of a clinical interview also. But I think what we'll focus on is, I know a lot of you are mentoring teachers and mostly will be working directly with teachers rather than with students, right? And the interview tool is a very popular tool we use with teachers to collect data from teachers or to understand teachers' perspectives. So we'll focus a little bit more activity we'll do with the interview tools, but I will go through this and I will also post some chapters from textbooks that will help you with even a survey tool, interview tools, give you more ideas, right? And you can read up about it more. I'll post it on the Telegram group, but we'll just overall go through the important aspects of each of these tools and we'll spend a little bit more time on interview. So we have different types of interviews, right? We have semi-structured, structured. We have, informal conversation, interview guide approach, standard open-ended, closed quantitative interviews. We have in-depth ethnographic interviews. Can anyone tell me what is the difference between all these? Just guess. So let's start with semi-structured and structured. It says structured interview is to collect quantitative data. Why would I have a structured interview? If I want to collect quantitative data, why would I not do a survey? Mostly structured interviews are like closed-ended, you kind of select. What would be a reason for a structured interview?
Get the objective.
Sorry, I can't make out.
In case of the structured interview, we actually trying to get the objective perspective there, exact. But in case of the semi-structured, we actually want like open-ended their perception, their view. That's why.
So I want to just stop here. It's very interesting. You said we want to get that authentic, but you're saying semi-structured is not authentic.
So we can have semi-structured interview sometimes because we need some more explanation. When we collect quantitative data, for example, somebody can figure I do this test or something like that. So we want in depth, a bit more detail.
Yes, so that we know why we do interviews because we want to know semi-structured interview. I'm asking why is there something called a structured interview at all?
Yeah, it's structured because there are fixed questions. We set the question that we will go beyond those questions.
Yes, so we know what a structured interview is like a survey, but it's an interview, right? It's very close-ended questions.
I got one idea. In case of semi-structured interview, along with, we have some set of the questions, but on the basis of the responses from the participant, we can some questions we can ask them those things. And
Okay, no, actually, the reason why we do structured interviews. Yeah, go ahead.
I think structure interview is more focused on
More focused to the purpose. No, it's nothing to do with the purpose. In purpose, in the sense, yeah, you do have a purpose, but the design of the tool is really because the structured interview has no closed-ended questions. And
we need to make it structured because in action research we concentrate our problem, and in semi-structured it means in this problem what is explore the participant. So structure and semi-structure blended form is semi.
no, I will tell you the difference. So in a structured interview, one of the reasons why we do it is because in large scale researches, right, you may not be collecting the data yourself, right? You may have 20 other people collecting data for you. So when you're doing that kind of interview process, you usually have it more structured because you have 20, 30 other people collecting data. And you don't want any ambiguity or difference, right? If I ask Narayan to go out, somebody else to go out, Dwani to go out, I want it to be a little bit more uniform, my data collection, right? So that's when I have it more structured because then it's easier for the interviewer to follow a very strict process. Questions are not deviate too much from those questions, right? So, and it's more precise and it's much more closed-ended. It may not be all closed-ended, but it's much more closed-ended because you don't want the interviewer to go off on their own and ask questions depending on the answer. You want them to follow a strict protocol. The second reason you have structured interviews is not all your participants may be literate, right? Especially in community-based research, you may now go and want to interview parents, or you may want to do a questionnaire for parents. Not every parent can perhaps read your questionnaire, right? So then what you do is you create it like a survey itself, very closed-ended, like a ticking thing. But you interview the respondent instead of asking them to read and write. Okay, so you have to think of who your respondents are when you're collecting data. So that is one very important thing when you're designing any tool. Who are your respondents? Are they able to answer? You may give a Google form. Are they able to, do they understand how to use a Google form, right? Or are they even literate to read and write? We don't know. And the third thing, of course, is with the structure versus the semi-structure is these two things. And if you want to collect very quantitative data, right? And usually, if you want to collect quantitative data, you use a form. And you give out a questionnaire to 100 people, 1,000 people. But some of the respondents may not be able to do the form themselves. Then you create a structured interview, and that enables you to engage with the respondents. Otherwise, for the most part, when we're talking to teachers in our education, we mostly use semi-structured interviews. if you want to use the interview tool, we use semi-structured interviews. Now, what the semi-structured interview is basically you don't write very precise questions. It's not like you don't create a tool, but you are able to, as an interviewer, change your questions a little bit based on the responses of the interview. That's why it's called semi-structured, because you're not expecting to follow the schedule exactly. You will change it depending on the response. Now, why should interviews be included in your research design? I think many of you told that already, that if you want more perspectives, you want more in-depth understanding of their situation, if you want to understand how they think about certain things, in more detail what they do in the class, you will do interviews. What are the pros and cons of an interview? Do you know that? Can you think of any pros, and can you think of any anything that is not good about interviews? Or any setback with your research when it comes to the using an interview?
Respondent, we cannot 100% believe respondent when doing the interview, he or she may say something, but in practice may do something else. So only the interview cannot be trustworthy.
That's important. So that is slightly different. The interview as a tool itself, that is not the drawback, right? Because even if I give a survey tool, I am never sure if my respondent has truthfully answered, right? Any tool is for that matter like that.
And then can be time consuming.
It can be time consuming, yes, but it is not so much about the truthfulness of what the respondent says, but you're right that it has to be triangulated, as they call it. So you have to have different ways of understanding the same data.
Sometimes the respondent might be quite biased. I have experience while working in academic. There is to be already terms and condition of the respondent that if you ask these questions, I am ready to answer it. If you ask this question, I am not ready to answer it. So I was forced to design my, when I was in semi-structured form, forcefully I was sent into one of structure one.
What is the questions you did not like to
Generally,
For example,
especially the public authorities want to be very much responding to the public issues. They do not want to respond in public forum. So they want the positive sides of themselves only, not the weaknesses or the drawbacks they have. Sometimes
okay, so we will talk about this. Yeah, nobody wants the negative side of this. Everybody wants to see the positive side. How will you design your interview? Then to get, so those are not drawbacks of the tool. The drawbacks of the tool itself are that you really have to, think of it in research and data collection, right? One is it is time consuming, right? An interview tool, if you have to interview 10 teachers, it is going to be time consuming, like it will take half an hour, 45 minutes. It's a time consuming way of collecting data. That is one. The second is you have to build a rapport. There is again relationship building between the interviewer and the interviewer. Right? So that is something that you have to think about. What is that relationship? And one of the relationships is like a authority, right? And if you're a researcher and you're a person of authority, and they can choose not to, anyone can choose not to answer your questions as a researcher, right? But I'll come back to yours, just wait on a bit on the nature of this thing. The other thing about in an interview tool is you have to transcribe all your interviews, right? And that is not an easy process. So nowadays we all record our interviews. And after we record, we transcribe our interviews. So as a researcher, think of yourself as a researcher. If you have 20 interviews you're doing, you have to transcribe 20. And they say transcribing interviews takes anywhere from 3 to 5 hours per interview. If it's like a half an hour to 1 hour. Because you have to write it down. If you don't record, it's also difficult to make notes, coherent notes while you are talking to the person, right? So you have to get permission to record, you have to transcribe that recording, or you have to be very efficient in writing notes while you are interviewing. So those are the drawbacks of an interview. But the positives are many because you do get a more in-depth understanding of your respondents, in that area of work that you're doing. So the positives are many, but the drawbacks are this, right? With an interview tool. Now, I want to go back now to what are the characteristics of a good interview, and address problems like you had. What do you think are some of the characteristics of a good interview?
May I say that?
Yeah.
The interview questions should be clear so that respondent can easily respond to them. Because sometimes the questions are complex, you may feel difficulty in responding.
Yes. So your question should be very simple. You may be asking a very complex topic, but if you frame your question in a complicated way, then you're going to have problems with the responses. Yeah.
Interviewers should not be judgmental and responses interview will be non-judgmental.
Yes, very important that you do not show agreement or disagreement about something. You're just saying, yes, that's good. Yeah.
Critical and right to not answer.
Sorry?
Critical response and right to not give the answer. Suppose they are not willing to say the answer or give the answer, then we stop or go to the next.
Yes, yes. Anything else? Those are all general things. Anything specific?
I think questionnaires should be provided prior to the interview. That the respondent will be going to get the responses.
Sorry, say that again.
Sometimes there is practice on interview that the question that we have class we test this interview. They have to be seen prior to that the person who is going to be interviewed.
That's
And
good
it's
point.
going to be some time so that we will get the information that we have seen.
Yes. Many times, in fact, interviewees will ask you, can you give me the interview schedule so that they know what you want to ask them about and they prepare for it. Very good. That is one of them. Yes.
Question. Our research question. Our interview question should be structured so that you get the answer.
Very important point is when you're going, don't ask very general questions. This is an interview tool, not how are you, I am fine kind of questions, right? We don't want that. That is outside the interview. You, of course, will build a rapport, ask them how are you, what they're eating for breakfast and everything. But what your question should be directly mapping to the answers you want, how you want to answer your research question, right? So which means what? You must be very knowledgeable in that area. So when you are doing a literature review, The literature review will also inform your tool design. What are the questions I'm asking? And are they relevant to my research question and to the concepts that I am trying to elicit responses for?
It should also be time bound. So the other part, interview is not like it from.
Yes, that is a very important point. Usually 1 hour is the maximum, and that is also a stressful interview, 1 hour, right? But within an hour, you should try and get time your interview such that you don't have 1,000 questions in your interview. Sorry, did I say anything?
No.
Sorry. Yeah, anything else? Absolutely, you're right. That is again the whole. It's about building that environment, and it should be comfortable and should also feel safe to respond, right? So a lot of times when we take consent, and we also say that we will not name them, we anonymize them, right? So a lot of people feel comfortable to give any responses if we don't name them. We don't say Narayan said this in our research. We say a teacher said this in this research, right? So it's very important that you ask their consent for recording. Tell them that how we will be using the research also. So very often people don't want to give responses because they don't know how you are using their data, right? So you have to explain to them when you start your interview, your duty is to explain what is your research about and how you will use the data, right? If you interview a teacher and you secretly take their data and give it to the administration for their promotion or for their salaries, they're of course not going to answer, right? So you should be able to explain to them that, look, this is for my research purposes. Your identity will not be revealed. We just want to understand this concept, and that's when it works. Anything else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are a lot of experienced researchers who have really gone through the process, probably asking them about their experiences would be really good for the other participants because that would be an eye opener because Dr. Mona and so many others are there who are really in the field. So borrowing their experiences can really help. I feel that sure maybe I'll open it for may Dr. Kadina may
They can't hear you. That's a soft voice. Yeah.
Some of the experiences that you have, I mean, you have gone through when conducting interviews and maybe talk about a little bit about that. If it is a possibility that like for say, the structure is also whether it's structured or unstructured, interacting with the interview. First and foremost, so to understand the context as well, because what I found is that not everyone, we are people not even if you're familiar with it, sometimes they open up, but on the other hand, others open up. So when we were conducting response, the very small and the position of the researcher was the participants. What are the shared in terms of age, in terms of our experience, or for example, like experiencing when we know the person about it. We have a shared experience. So this actually comes in. But sometimes, for example, if you are a very junior researcher, like young researcher, and then you are interviewing older person, that person may not take the seriously because I would be younger than him, he would have a certain perceptions and all. So then actually there's the position of the power, what is it called, the power between the power position of the participants also. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have some experience regarding interview process. If you ask some gender specific questions, for example, I'm taking interview to ladies, and I see that women are very weak as founders. Really, they do not feel comfortable. Some religion specific questions, for example, or two personal questions to the individual. So we get a first talk the respondents, and if you try to start personal questions, then they feel discomfortable. And while teaching, I'm learning also some teachers maybe, for example, they may teach in grade 7 and 8, maybe for example, this is math in grade 6, 7 and 8, and if you try to ask answer questions, okay, grade 9, 10 grades, so they feel discomfort, not comfortable. So there are lots of experiences. For example, some questions or questions, do you like this or not? But they cannot end this some repetitive discomfort. So this is what I experienced.
That's a very good point. And I want to take off on your idea of experience. And then slightly different way. It's the nature of the question you ask. Is what he was also talking about. Never ask. Most of your questions should not be evaluative questions, right? You shouldn't ask them to judge things. That is not their job. Their job is not to judge. You will analyze and judge data, right? So you never ask why questions. You only ask about their experience. You ask how questions and you ask what questions. Right? How did they do something? What did they do? Those are the kinds of questions you ask. But you never ask why. Why did you do it like this? Was it good or bad? You do not put judgmental words in your interview questions. It is for you to judge whether whatever was good or bad later on and justify it with your analysis. So, and the why questions are for the researcher to answer the analysis. So remember, when you're formulating interview questions, you always ask from their experience. So even you never ask questions, evaluative questions, like is this good, is this bad, this program is very bad, why is it bad? That's a bad interview question to ask. The different way to ask is what were the problems you encountered in this program? You will decide later why these problems made the implementation bad or good. Right? So you have to be very careful how you frame your questions. A lot of your interview schedule depends on how you frame your questions. Never use why questions in your interviews. And a lot of it is to be based. She said we use the word authentic and we use the word are they telling the truth, right? Usually when you ask evaluative questions, they will become defensive and they may not tell you the truth. But if you ask to share their experience and not use any judgment, just share their experience. What were the problems? What were the highlights? What do you think are the highlights of this program? Or what do you think were the problems? Did you experience any problem? If you ask questions like that, based on their experience, then they will not hesitate so much to respond to questions. Right? So that is an important thing about. And how do you, some questions you may need to directly probe them, but most of the interview questions should be indirect, so that you will be able to get an idea of what they are thinking, what they're doing. So what they do and what the experience is very important. And very often, because we want to analyze something, we ask the interviewer directly this analysis question about why. And that is a no-no for an interview. Any whys in your interview, remove that question. Right?
I just want to say 2 points.
We're just in interviews and it's getting late.
No, I just want to say 2 quick things.
Sure, please. go
One,
ahead.
I think it's really important as an interviewer to listen to the other person, your respondent,
Yes.
and not be judgmental, but also not go with a know-it-all attitude. Sometimes we as researchers or interviewers think that we know it all, since we are the researchers or the interviewers. So we should not go with that attitude. We should patiently listen to the respondents. The respondents have rich experiences to share. One. And secondly, I think whenever we are interviewing, we should always do some background, literature review. We should understand the subject for which we are interviewing. So, for example, if I'm doing a research study on, say, teacher professional development in Nepal, for example, so I should have some understanding or a background knowledge of what's the TPD landscape like in Nepal or Maldives, and go for any problem that we're trying to understand. We should not go with a blank slate. Yeah,
Absolutely important points. Yeah.
related to LIMAS. I think one of the things that I've seen a lot of researchers who are speaking to people in other countries is also about the language. Right?
Yes.
So English is a very sort of controversial thing. Some respondents might have very, very rich experience which they're able to only articulate in their own language. And I think in that scenario, maybe taking help of a person who could be the interpreter, or if you, choosing someone who knows the language and get the actual insights. And also not looking at the respondent as someone who's coming from a deficient perspective, because that I think also is sort of a bias of some researchers.
So I think when you design your tool, especially if you design it to not ask evaluative questions, right? That reduces your idea of showing that you know it all. Just because you are asking questions and eliciting their experiences. So that reduces the that coming forward as an expert. And that is a fine line you have to, because in some senses you are going as a more knowledgeable person as a researcher. But how do you make the person comfortable, like Matt said, right? You really have to establish that comfort and that for the interviewee to feel safe to and to express themselves. So I'm just going to quickly go over, and then we are going to together develop a interview tool and try it out. So focus group discussions, really focus group discussions we use if we have to interview many people, many teachers say, but we cannot, we don't have the time. Basically, a focus group discussion is like a semi-structured interview, except that it's more low cost, obviously, because you're getting like 5-10 people together and talking about it. What you have to worry in a focus group discussion is if 1 or 2 people will dominate the whole discussion and you're not able to hear everybody's voice, right? Some people may be very boisterous and want to speak all the time. So that is a risk you will have to take with a focus group discussion. So basically you have to, very much what we spoke about in the interview holds good with the focus group discussion. Here, in fact, you have to build a rapport among a group of people before you start. You have to be comfortable, you have to be able to facilitate. Another additional thing in focus group discussion is if two people have opposing points of view, you need to know how to handle that and say, okay, yours is a valid perception, yours is also valid, and just take it in and not make it into an argument among respondents. So often that happens when two of your respondents may have very differing views, and it might become a heated argument. So these are all additional things of group work that you have to consider with a focus group discussion. And in any of the designing of any of the tools, you have to have your literature review done. You have to connect it to your research question, and you have to know the landscape. You have to know the context of the place. You need to have a little additional information apart from just your research questions, right? That is very important, like we must say. Yes, so I am not going into classroom observations, but again, with classroom observations, you have to have a.
Do you have any thoughts on doing interviews in person versus doing them online? Maybe later you can touch upon it, because there's a vast difference, right? And some of us might, as some fellows might have to do it online.
Yeah.
So what to keep in mind?
Sure, we can talk about that. I'll come to that later. So with classroom observations, remember, it's very important that you have a focus area in mind, right? You cannot observe everything that happens in the classroom. So even your classroom observation has to have focus areas depending on your research question and what you want to get out of the research. So you can have both methods of classroom observation, quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative is where you create a nice schedule and you say how many questions that students ask, and you just do a tick mark, right? So at the end of the class, you would say there were 15 student questions, 2 teacher questions, like that. Very quantitative.
Excuse me, while this said that they will take this form of quantitative classroom observation, then how can we anticipate the activity that the teacher is going to do in the class? What will be the basis of formation of that statement?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So you will have to decide. Obviously, your research question, you will be going with a particular focus area in mind, right? Say you're doing project-based learning, right? So they spoke about all the things that happen in project-based learning. It's collaborative, it connects to the real world. What are the other things they said, right? So you will have ideas around that. So you will have your schedule based on that. You want to see evidence of collaborative activity. You want to see evidence of connecting to the real world. You want to see evidence of asking questions which are, understanding level questions. You want to have questions which are just yes, no answers. So you will prepare based on what you want your focus area. And then you'll either qualitatively write down what is the interaction that happened, or quantitatively you'll put a check mark saying, yes, there were 4 yes, no questions, 4 these kind of questions. There were 3 interactions.
Is there something
important? Yeah, sure, come.
Are we flexible enough to change our checklist during the classroom observation, if necessary?
So you always have the space in a classroom observation. You are always keep space for empty notes, right? So if your checklist doesn't answer something and something unusual comes up in your class, always there are notes, right? Field notes that you have that you just write it down. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
One
So-
second, if you wanted to say something.
That's fine. So I think the question you asked was very important, because you need to understand what is the focus of, so if the project-based learning is the focus, then, as you said, some of the concepts you already have in mind, right? And these are the things I'm going to check whether they are happening in the classroom or not. And some of the ideas you will get from understanding and knowing what are the current practices that are there in the classrooms. And this is what we did in one of the sessions that I did, right? What are the practices which are common in your classrooms or bodies? So from that, the kind of practices that you are expecting changing, or you are expecting teachers to try out any new practices or new activities or new resources, you are going to see how that is, whether that is being used or not at first level. And the second level would be how they are being used. Now, how they are being used, you have to see whether you can do it quantitatively or you have to write it down qualitatively to the description. So it all depends on the research focus and the research question. That will determine what is quantitative and what is qualitative. Somebody else.
Yeah.
So I also wanted to add on to the question that she asked. I think most of what is already been told. But I want to actually go a little bit into this because when we do classroom observation, first of all, there can be two types of observation, like structured observation and unstructured observation. So when we come into a class, based on our research objectives, we will have a checklist, something that we are going to observe. And then we will be observing that. Along with that, we will be taking notes, additional whatever that comes within the setting, we will be noting them down. So it is that I wanted to tell her that we get to that question. There is like flexibility based on what kind of research we are doing, what is the objective of our research. There we can decide whether we can do a structured or unstructured observation. We can be even inside or outside.
That was my next thing. Yeah, but you can go ahead.
Okay,
So
you can just carry
go
on.
ahead. Yeah. So the role of the researcher is very important in any observation. Are you going to participate or are you going to silently observe, right? Because your participation also changes the discourse in the classroom. So if you and the teacher especially or the should know that whether you're going to observe silently or whether you're going to participate. It's very important that the teacher knows this, and you have to decide with the teacher in your classroom observation if you're going to be a silent observer and therefore she will not involve you with anything and just teach her in regular class, or if you are going to intervene at some point. But you cannot say you're a silent observer then intervene in your classroom. Then it changes the classroom dynamics and discourse, and that won't be a valid data collection. So that has to be something beforehand. Now, I have a little bit of a doubt in this unstructured classroom observation. I find that too many things are happening in a classroom, and if your classroom observation tool, if you don't have any, even a slightly bit of structure to it, you don't get good data out of it because you don't know what to write down in the free notes. So I would recommend that you have a certain structure, but you also have room for writing free notes when you feel it doesn't fit in the structure.
I wanted to add something to that. Based on the also based on the previous question as well. So it can become as detailed depending on the purpose again. For example, if you are looking at something like your table, you may still have like what happens every 6 minutes. So you can go on putting the check mark according to that. So
Absolutely.
it all
Yes.
depends on the purpose.
Yes, it all depends on the purpose, and some people do it chronological. So they have an observation every 5 minutes. They'll say what happens in the first 5 minutes. So even in that respect, if it's unstructured, at least you have a timing structure, right? Where you say first 5 minutes, what happens, you write it separately, second 5 minutes. But usually you want to see what, like Ruchi said, is very important. You have to have a focus area for your observation. Otherwise, you're collecting all kinds of things and you realize it becomes noise later on when you're trying to analyze. More focused observations are very useful. I won't go into clinical interviews today because what's the time? 3:15. Okay. So we will actually try all together. We are going to try and create an interview schedule. Okay, I'm going to give you a scenario. All of us, since we've all talked about project-based learning, let us think we are interviewing teachers to understand their needs and understand what they know about project-based learning. Okay, so we are going to interview teachers because we want to do an intervention in project-based learning in our schools. That I'm just imagining this. Okay, that we want to do an action research on project-based learning in our school, and we want to interview teachers and find out what they think about project-based learning, what do they know about project-based learning, and you know, what do they feel about implementing project-based learning. So, can we think of a few questions? Maybe we'll think of yeah. Can we just type it down here when they ask the questions? You can change the clinical interview out. I can show an example. Just the interviewing teachers. So come on, let's wake up a little bit before tea. Just ask questions, different questions.
What is your understanding about project-based?
Are you aware of?
Hold on. Now you're starting. So let's just write it all down and then decide whether it's good or bad or we have to modify it. What is your understanding about project-based learning? Okay, that's one question. Next question.
I'm have you used the project-based approach in your classroom?
Okay, have you used the project-based approach in your classroom? Okay.
How would you define a project?
How would you define a project? Okay. How would you define a project? Yeah. Let's not be judgmental about this question. Let's just know all the questions out. So, right? It's a quality, it's a semi-structured qualitative response. Okay. What is the now?
What are the activities that you conduct inside the classroom?
Okay. What are the activities that you conduct in a particular classroom? Okay.
Have you applied collaborative learning? Have you applied collaborative approaches?
Have you applied collaborative approach in your classroom?
How do you think project-based learning is students to increase learning experience?
How do you think project-based?
How do you think project-based learning helps the students to increase their learning experience?
How do you think project-based learning will increase students' learning? Okay. Will improve actually students' learning better. Okay. Anything else? Yes, now I got the right person.
When do you use project work in the class?
You answered my point. What did I say? Never use what question? Why?
I have to wait. Wait. How do you differentiate between project and project based learning?
Sorry.
How do you differentiate between project and project based learning?
How do you differentiate between doing a project and project-based learning?
What are your roles while implementing project-based learning? What are your and students' roles
Okay.
and implementing?
What are yours and students' role for implementing project-based learning? Okay. Any other question? You said when do you?
When do you use project work? When don't get here.
When?
Yeah.
You got cited and it changed the mind to when. When do you use project-based learning in your classroom? You will be very inclusive and have all questions. Any other questions? No? Yes.
Change in the learning.
Okay. So this is, we are asking it before the, okay. Have you observed any change in your students after project-based learning? Okay. Okay. Yes.
What are the activities that you did that connect learning and real world experience of the students?
Okay. What are the activities that you have done that connect classroom learning with real world?
Have you experienced any challenges while implementing project learning?
Okay. Have you experienced any challenges? I can't make out who's talking again. Thank you. Okay. I think we are running out of time. We will go with this many. So good. All our questions are what and how. So that itself is very good. Now we are going into this classroom. We don't know if teachers have implemented project-based learning. We don't know if they know what is project-based learning. Right? We just want to find out what do they think about it and do they know anything about it. We don't expect them to know about project-based learning. So, so the first question, what is your understanding about project-based learning? What do you think about such a question? So I'll tell you what, we'll do this slightly differently. I am going to be your teacher and you are going to all ask me these questions and I'm going to respond. Okay?
Are you aware of video?
Hold on. So one by one, any of you ask me these questions and I'm going to respond.
How do you define PBL?
What is your understanding of what is there, right?
I think that
You will change that to what you understand by PBL. I will answer, I don't know what is PBL. Then what will you do?
I will pick one. First question already.
Yeah, so never ask, that's another thing with your know why questions. Don't ask questions in interviews that are giving textbook definition answers. Okay, this is like a textbook question. What is your understanding about PBL? Now, if I am a smart teacher and I don't know what is PBL, I will quickly help Mr. Google to come and say, okay, quickly I will see what is project-based learning and I will give you a textbook answer.
Like in our online systems, we used to do.
So we know now that we should not ask questions that are very textbook based, right? So in the interview question, Dwani said, what about online versus face-to-face? Face-to-face, it is very difficult for me to go on Google and give answers. But if I'm online on Zoom and being interviewed, I can go to Google very quickly and give you a textbook answer, right? You don't want textbook answer from teachers because you want their experience. So we will say this is not a very interesting interview question. Okay. Now, how have you used PBL approach in your classroom? Now, somebody asked me that.
Have you used PBL approach in your classroom?
I have only two answers. Yes or no. Do you want your interview question to have yes, no answers? Questions?
No. Sometimes we might.
No, very not in interview.
How many teachers are using PBL and
Then you go to interview. Then you ask how many teachers in your class are using and not using. But in one-on-one interview with teacher, have you used PBL, yes or no? That not this particular question, but any interview, semi-structured interview, avoid yes, no kind of questions because you will get nothing. Then you have to ask another question.
I have a question. The question is regarding yes, no question. The same question, have you used the PBL approach in the classroom? And if the teacher says no, so that's fine. So we understand that the teacher has not used PBL approach and we should not ask further questions to make him feel humiliation or something like that.
Yes.
So we can avoid that question or such question. There might be other questions related to PBL approach like that. So we can either avoid them or
hold that thought, because I told you very specifically what is the purpose of the interview. The purpose of the interview is not to is to understand. We don't know if the teacher has used project-based learning or if the teacher knows about project-based learning. So all the questions which are very specifically directed at project-based learning are a problem actually. So we will come down. So for example, again, this is a textbook definition. How would you define a project? Okay, that is textbook definition. What are the activities that you conduct in a classroom? That is a good question because you will understand, are there activities that resemble a project kind of activity? You will get a sense and you can add that and say, can you give an example? Right? You can always ask, can you give an example of activities? What are the kind of activities? Can you give some examples of different activities? Now, that will enable the researcher to know whether these activities are activities that work with project-based learning, or how much learning by doing that the teacher does.
So the question is, what are the activities that you carry out in the classroom, right?
Yes.
Something like
Yeah, and ask them to give an example.
Give an example.
So you are not even mentioning the word project-based learning, right? You are just asking for activities. Another good question is, have you applied a collaborative approach? Right? You know that the project-based learning requires collaboration and collaborative. So you can see what kind of collaborative techniques the teacher has used. That will enable this teacher has already used some features of project-based learning. Then, yes, I have 1 minute. Okay, I'm going very fast now. Nobody disturb me. I'm going rapid fire. Okay, so what do you think? How do you think PBL will improve student learning? Wrong
Not good question. Direct.
cross. So why? Because you don't even know that they've applied project-based learning, right? So we will not, but what you can ask, it's a good question. But what you can ask is, have you used activities? After that, you can ask, do you feel this activities helps enhance student learning? That you can ask, right? So you can put that question on top and ask that question. Now, how do you differentiate doing a project and PBL? No, wrong. That is definition again. You are asking them to define something not good. What are roles of students? Not in PBL, but you can continue with activities, right? Because you started with activities, you can say, how do students, or what are your issues with when you do activities? Or, what do students do when you do activities? Are they sitting in class? Are they doing something? So you can prompt. When do you use is also not okay. How do you observe changes instead of asking for project-based learning? You can say when you do activities, right? This is a very good question again. What are the activities that you have done connecting classroom and real world experiences? Because you know that project-based learning, one of the features is connecting to real world. So maybe they have done some activities on their own connecting to real world. Through their experience, you will find out how much practice. Have you experienced any challenges implementing? Again, you say implementing activities. So I hope you got an idea of how to frame questions. Yes?
Students from the last year not good.
No, all of us make these mistakes, and that's an important thing. None of us are perfect, right? When we make an interview schedule, so the last thing before you go for TRP is that every tool you have to pilot, right? Johnny spoke about language. You may go in speaking English, you may realize that your teacher is more comfortable speaking some other language. You may not be ready with the other language. So you have to pilot all your questions. Even if you know the language and you can speak in another language, translating on the go there is very difficult. You have to think of the right words, especially technical words like project-based learning, constructivism. If you're using such words, technical words, you have to think beforehand what kind of examples you can give, right? And for each of these questions, have you implemented activities in your classroom? You may have a different idea about activity, your teacher may have a different idea. You must be ready with some examples. For example, I did something like this. Have you done an activity like this? If they don't respond, you should be able to give examples and prompt for more answers. So experience-based, what questions, how questions, and they should be indirect, especially because you are asking, see the situation. You are asking teachers in an interview before they have done anything about project-based learning. Obviously, if you do this same interview after they have completed project-based learning, then it will be a different set of questions. Then you can ask many questions like, how do you think project-based learning will improve students' learning? So you must see which context, which situation to ask the questions. And no textbook definition questions. Right? So any question that Mr. Google can answer, you please don't ask in your interview. Okay? That is rule number one, especially for online interviews. And online, the other thing is give them the schedule ahead of time. It helps, especially if the connection is not good and things like that.
Yeah, I have one question. You when you said not to use by question, right? But when we do research in all this in our context, a lot of our instruments we have by question. Okay, with by question at the end we ask them to explain. Yes or no question also we ask them to explain. And we use lot of by question. Then we suddenly when we said don't use by question, we were looking at each other. Can you little bit tell us why not to use by questions?
When you're doing by questions, you are asking the respondent to analyze your research problem. Right?
Tell us why do you think, and then that.
It's very difficult for me to tell a generic question, right? So in this circumstance, what kind of my question have you asked? Ask me that and then I will tell you. See, basically, when you say avoid is not like maybe in some context it makes sense, unless I see the context. But basically, what you are doing is you are going to take all this data and you are going to answer the right question in your research. That's basically.
For example, why do you use project-based learning?
Not a good question. Not a good question. So why do you use project-based learning? That is again a little bit of
Just now you asked us to give an example of why.
yeah. So why is it not good? Because instead of that, I would reframe it like this. What if you want to ask why do you use a project-based learning? Better question to frame is what benefits have you observed in project-based learning? What problems have you seen through project-based learning? That will answer your why question, right? But you're not asking, it's a very abstract question, right? When you ask why, you have to do analysis and give the answer. You don't want analysis from the feature, you want to do the analysis. But if you want to ask them why, then why? Because you want to see if there's does it improve student learning, does it connect to, you want to see that. Instead, you ask them, what are the benefits of project-based learning? What are the problems of, you will get your why answer. That's how you must.
Based on, I think many of qualitative, you can ask why questions, but it depends on the research study as well, and also on the focus of the study. So, in my understanding, I think enough of it what we usually do and what has been discussed here is different. So, what has been, I mean, if it is a process study and if we really want to understand something, then perhaps a why question is more appropriate because it always depends on the focus of the question itself, focus of the study itself. So, when we are talking about extra research and other types of studies, so I think a lot of case studies were done in college. So, those case studies according to a lot of, people, the experts in case study, the why question is a must to include in it. So, probably that is the conclusion there in that instance.
That's why.
Yes, that's what you said. Yes, exactly.
But I would see how you can frame your why questions. Think of what you want to answer, what kind of an answer you want from your why question, right? So in this case, I'm guessing, why do you do project-based learning? Obviously, it is to improve students' learning, right? So you want to know what are the elements that make them. So you ask them, what are the benefits of it? What do you think are the benefits?
Actually, I understood the point. Just want to clear because we have been doing that for a very long time. That's why. But the point you made is actually very good. Because when we ask why, it's like they are doing the analysis as you said. But when we ask
Okay. See you all tomorrow again. Tomorrow I'm going to do data analysis.